Welcome back to Spinning the Past. Today I'm going to go back to the original purpose of this channel, and that's to look at some historical documents related to spinning, no matter how indirect. So this is that I found here at Indiana University Library. An address, it's wool industry in the United States. This was published in 1869. You could see it's kind of in a little bit of poor shape here, but I am going to read it so that you don't have to. So way back when, whoever put this in this binder, see, it started falling apart. So I'm going to have to take this back, and I'm going to have to tell them that they have to fix this, they conserve, those who conserve these things to conserve, because I would like this to stay in public domain. But this came 1925 here at the bottom is when it came into the library. And then this says January 31st, 1946. May have been the last time that anyone checked out this book. So instead of handling the book, because I know it's kind of gentle, it's in precarious, I don't want to mess with it. I was really careful with it last night as I was reviewing it for you. So I'm going to pull out the most important things that I learned so that you, if you don't have access to this book, that you will know a lot more than I did even when I first started. So this is a speech by the National Institute of Association of Wool Manufacturers in January 1869. So at that time, let's see if I can get my papers correct here. So here we go. So here's some quotes that at this exhibit that I pulled out. So this is a quote from Mr. Bigelow. Could you pass through this great exhibit so honorably represented here and look on their busy wheels and cards and spindles and looms, their myriads of thrifty, happy working men and women, the huge masses of raw material which they work up, and the countless carloads of finished fabrics which daily leave the mills, you would need no argument to assure you that the woolen industry of the country is second to none other, whether individually or nationally considered. So a couple things to bring out here. So at this exhibit, they were showing different parts of the wool manufacturing process, and those that were hand spinners, like, yay, there are wheels there are hand cards, there are spindles, there are looms, and those spindles are probably bobbin spindles for weaving. And it said there are a myriad of thrifty, I thought that was interesting, thrifty, happy working men and women. So men and women were employed and working in this industry. So even back in 1869, we think, oh, women didn't work outside the home, but women did work, according to this, and men worked in this wool industry. It doesn't go into say what if it was broken down between spinning versus weaving, but I thought that was something to bring out. And it also talked about the carloads of finished fabrics. Now, in our modern times, we think a carload would be like an automobile. Of course, that automobiles were not invented then. So, and they could mean cart loads. They could mean even really rudimentary locomotives carrying these goods. Another thing, he said that at that time, the annual value of wool manufacturers and component industries at that time were $175 million. That was an 1869 gold standard. And when I checked on it today, that would be $3.1 billion US dollars. 4/5 of those were from American wool products. He said coarse carpet wools, of course, were not grown here in the U.S. So that also is a clue. So they're not getting their coarse carpet wools that are manufactured or grown in the U.S. There were worsted combing wools. There were fine clothing wools, which were grown by the U.S. in a limited quantity. So 4/5 are just basic American wools, and then the rest of these other subcategories, the worsted combing, the fine wools, were only 1/5. And if you looked in any yarn store today, you would see probably the reverse, that the fine wools are 4/5 of the yarns in the yarn shops, and only 1/5 might be other types of stronger wools. So it also says here, in a more market in the world, in what other market in the world could better Casimeres? Cassimeres. Casimeres is a fine twilled woolen cloth of worsted warp and a woolen weft. So if you come across that in any of your historical reenactment, then Casimir, you'll know how that cloth was made. It was often for men's suits at that time, so just kind of think of that. He kind of goes back, reminding that in 1859, 10 years before, their manufacturers had scarcely attempted anything beyond common wools of the coarser. So in 1859, coarser wools or coarser fabrics of wool were the standard. But he says now he's going to list different types of wool and wool products. Bunting, worsted reps and serges for furniture covering, worsted furniture damasks, Italian cloths, worsted poplins, mohair poplins, mohair lusters, mohair is a goat, okay, merinos, so merinos, 1859, we're there, astracans, which is a type of a carpet, chinchilla, okay, cloakings, Scotch casimeres, embroidered table covers, and Axminster carpets. I take that back. Astracans, I gotta scratch that. I got that mixed up. Astracans are the caracals. So those are the fleeces. They are baby caracals. They have really curly coats, and they're slaughtered at newborns or fetuses, and those are used as kind of sheepskin hats. The Russians use those. So the annual wool consumption was, listen to this, 1869, $240 million in 1869. Of that, another 32 million was foreign or imported woolen goods, for a total of 239,819,518. So the U.S. portion of this was 3/4 of all that. But even so, the manufacturers, he says, the U.S. manufacturers suffer more or less in the market from prejudices and prepositions that are ill-founded. There's a preference for fabrics of foreign origin that has naturally come down from the time, not very distant, when our domestic products were generally inferior. So there was a preference for foreign-made woolen goods. And he also talks about this tariff of 1846, which imposed upon wool a higher rate of duty than some of its manufacturers paid, and that proved especially adverse, and it bankrupted many wool manufacturers. So a tariff that was an additional tariff put on wool manufacturers above that, which is for foreign manufacturers, That you can just see how that would not do well for your own domestic production. And you can Google Tariff of 1846 and you can read more about that. It was to open the U.S. markets principally for grain exports, and by doing that, it flooded the market that was in the U.S. and that drove down prices. So how did this all happen? So remember, we had a war in here, 1861, 1865. The scarcity of cotton was caused by the war. Okay, so this is really important for you historical reenactors, right around the Civil War, maybe just after. So the scarcity of cotton, which was caused by the war, created an extraordinary demand for woolen fabrics, which came largely into use where cotton had been used before. So with the Reconstruction, everything with cotton and the plantations that failed, all that led to a reduction of cotton production, but an increase in woolen production. So if you're on team woolen, then that was a good thing for you. There was such an intense demand of wool for the army clothing. So think of it, armies had wool uniforms. They make really nice uniforms. And that greatly stimulated the growing and manufacture of wool. So that was good for the wool industry. And many cotton mills were converted into woolen mills around that time. And that has completely flipped, where over 80% of the mills in the world are dedicated to the really short fibers that are cotton. So things more they change, the more they stay the same. So he gives from 1815, 1860, and 1868 pounds of wool grown in the U.S. So it went from 52 million, I'm just going to round it, 52 million in 1850 to 60 million in 1860, and then 177 million by 1868. Wow, that was huge uptick in wool grown in terms of pounds. So if you're doing historical reenactment right after this time, right around this time, between 60 and even 1870, instead of everything being cotton would have been scarce and very expensive. You would have been wearing wool. So just consider that if you're doing reenactment. Wool was the thing. Okay, so this is also something I found. There was a tariff of 1861 that also affected that they didn't tariff the imports, but the exports. That was my understanding. U.S. labor costs around this time, the 1860s, were higher. So he breaks down what labor costs versus wool manufacturers. Let's talk about wool manufacturers specifically. So whatever you could produce in the U.S., it would cost 25% more than that same production in Great Britain. So a domestic product would be 25% more in the U.S. than a Great Britain import. And carpet mills was 58% difference. And in France, Belgium, Prussia, and Austria, it was 100% more expensive to make from the U.S., produced from the U.S., than from France, Belgium, Prussia, and Austria. So that's not very good for U.S. manufacturing. This disparity in taxing and the labor costs differed greatly between the U.S. So you can see how more things change, the more they stay the same. We're still talking about tariffs. We're still talking about what is the best for U.S. manufacturers. So he talks about, like, for example, in the cotton industry, specifically for Great Britain, why would there be so much more expensive to manufacture in the U.S.? In Great Britain, they only had to pay tax on the rental value of the building, the machinery, and what we could call marketing today. They didn't call it marketing, but that's what that amounts to. They did not tax the value of the machinery, and that's what happened in the U.S., nor the capital employed in working the factory. So that was another tax. So U.S. local taxation, kind of this tiered system we have in the U.S., where you have cotton is taxed, the buildings are taxed, the land is taxed, the machinery is taxed, and all aggregates from local, county, state, and federal all adversely affected manufacturing in the U.S. So he says here, the capital required to build a cotton mill in the U.S. is double that of building one in Great Britain. Double. So certain economic policies were not good for manufacturing in the U.S. And I really kind of was surprised by some of that. Some I didn't know from history, but I wanted to share that with you. So today I went over this book, An Address upon the Wool Industry of the United States, delivered at the exhibition of the American Institute in the city of New York, October something, 1869, by Erastus B. Bigelow. So you might be able to get this through interlibrary loan. There might be a microfilm copy. I know we have it here, but I'm going to send this in so that they can work on this, because this is falling apart and it's damaged, and I don't want anything more to happen with this. But I want to show you right now as well the next book that I'm going to work on and review for you, which I thought was really interesting. This is Spain's Golden Fleece, Wool Production and the Wool Trade from Middle Ages to the 19th Century. Some of you, by Phillips. So some of you may know that the merinos, which all spinners love to spin now, came from Spain. I did a video previously when I talked about merinos really didn't come into the U.S. until 1808. So if you're historical reenactment, you shouldn't be using merinos if you're doing a period before 1808. But I needed to know because merino became the standard for so many breeds, for improving breeds in the U.S., that there was a classification of I guess, fleeces, depending on how close that they were to being merino, whether it was 100%, whether it was 3/4 blood, half blood, quarter blood. That was actually a classification system. So I wanted to learn more about merinos and learn about that, again, because it is so ubiquitous in the world, even today, that so many wool products are, they said they're wool, but they're really merino. And we have so many other breeds of sheep that are disappearing because we're not valuing those fleeces as much as the merino sheep. So, but it's always good to read and to know, and I'm hoping I'll learn some history, and it's going to take me a little while to read, but and I might have to do it in a couple of parts, but I will let you know what I found out about the history of merino sheep in Spain specifically, but they will compare it to other countries, I'm sure. So that's it for Spinning the Past, and I will see you next time.